The German leader Hermann Goering, in the wake of the Second World War, when he was being investigated, when he was being interrogated at Nuremberg, was asked how the German government, and how he, as one of their senior ministers, had succeeded in getting the German people and the German court system and the German institutions to go along with the level of coercion that they had introduced in the 1930s. Why was it that there was not a greater level of resistance among the population? Was it specifically through coercion? Was it through legislation? Did they bribe or intimidate the judiciary? How did they achieve it? And he said, no, it was none of those things, even though some of them played a role. What they did, or how they did it, was by creating a climate of fear. He stated that once you create a climate of fear, you can get a population to do anything. You can get your societal and administrative institutions to disobey their own consciences. You can enable people to stand by as they see their neighbors being dragged away to some horrible place to be unjustly punished. If you can make people fearful enough, you can get them to do anything. I think that's very important in the context of what is happening in Ireland today. Thankfully, we haven't as yet descended to the level of barbarity witnessed in Germany in those years. But nevertheless, it is a condign lesson, because what we are witnessing is the creation of a climate of fear and the generation of irrationality among the population. What we witness every night on our television screens and from the apparatchiks of the government and the denizens of our health system is the creation of terror, the unseen enemy. Just as the Germans had, they had the unseen enemy from the outside and from within. Are we now having the same sense of fear being created by this virus that none of us can see, and that is a potential killer? When we see members of the Garda Síochána refusing to talk to people unless they put their masks on because they state that their health is at risk, we really have to wonder, have they taken leave of their senses? Are they behaving in a rational way? And that's the members of the Gardaí, whom you would expect to be fairly sensible people, ordinary people going about the street wearing masks in the middle of the open air and being terrified of those who do not wear masks. Well, this is not a very pleasant sight, and it's a very worrying sight to see. We are being presented with a rush of statistics every night on our television screens in regard to R numbers and infection rates and so on and so forth. But extraordinarily, there are 2 or 3 very important statistics that we don't have. The first is the actual number of people who are being infected. It is now recognized and it's accepted by the WHO that the primary system of testing, the PCR system, is likely to give a very, very large number of false positives. And given that few people do test positive for the virus, the fact of having a significant number of false positives exaggerates the disproportion. So we actually don't know how many people are suffering from the disease. Of those who are claimed to be suffering, we don't know how many are sick. We don't know how many are asymptomatic. We don't know how serious they are, but we're nevertheless being told of these hundreds of people every day who are getting this disease, and it is being presented as a lethal killer. The second thing we don't know is how many people are actually dying of the disease. At least our state propaganda system, Radio Television, has now stopped talking of people who have died of COVID and has started telling us about people who have died with COVID, and they don't differentiate, obviously, between the two. This is something we called for as long ago as a year ago. But it is obviously clear, and that everybody is aware of this, that the great majority of people who are dying from this disease are people with significant comorbidities, and a huge majority of them are people who are elderly and frail. Um, Typically, in a flu season or in an ordinary winter season, elderly and frail people will be taken by what are normally treatable conditions, such as pneumonia, which at least wouldn't be a significant threat to people who are younger. So when we say that large numbers of people are being killed by coronavirus, but we're actually dealing with very, very frail and elderly people, um, is it not appropriate that we should assess, well, what proportion of those people were getting very close to the end of their lives anyway? And is it therefore proportionate for us to take the measures that we've taken, which undoubtedly lead to significant health risks in other parts of the population, not to mention the destruction of our economy and the destruction of the mental health of so many of our people? Related to this issue of the creation of a climate of fear and irrationality is the issue of the extent to which our state institutions have not been able to help the people of this country. And there's three in particular that I think should be mentioned. The first is the courts. We have seen people being hauled off before the district courts to be summoned, often punished very heavily with very substantial fines, despite the fact that they are behaving in a perfectly peaceful manner, perhaps refusing to leave an area when a guard tells them, even though they have no intention of causing any harm to anybody. They're generally completely non-violent people. But they're being arrested on the basis of being more than 5 kilometers from an area, or simply on the basis of refusing to obey a guarded direction. Surely, even in a district court situation, a member of the Irish judiciary should be aware of the very severe consequences of attacking constitutional right to freedom of movement and freedom of protest. But they don't seem to have done so. In regard to the higher courts, we await the detailed judgments in regard to the John Waters case and in regard to the upcoming case taken by Tracy O'Mahony. Certainly in regard to the first Waters and Gemma O'Doherty case, there is some hope that the High Court judge seemed to believe that they may have had a case, albeit that they didn't present it properly. But given that this has been going on for more than a year, and this is undoubtedly a matter of the most extreme urgency, it seems to me that this should have been dealt with by the courts in a much, much quicker fashion. There are really serious issues at stake here of freedom, of liberty, of constitutional action, and of freedom to worship. In regard to our churches, which is another major pillar of our society, they have not defended the right of worship, which they should do. In fact, their very first action, before it was even demanded of them by government, was to close down centres of worship and to deny access to the sacraments. Well, I won't comment on what that says about their actual levels of belief of our senior hierarchy in what they preach. But it is extremely worrying. I believe if they had stood up to the government, even if at this stage they began to stand up to the government and open their churches, I think they would have enormous support in doing so. And I think they might bring this climate of irrationality to an end. The other pillar which has let us down, of course, is the media. They have not investigated what's happening. There is very, very little critical analysis of the statements that are being made by NEFIT. They go totally unchallenged, despite the fact that there are many, many eminent doctors worldwide who are challenging the presumptions of what is happening in the lockdown. I'm afraid none of that is being put to NEFIT or to the government in an aggressive fashion, as you would expect the media to do. They seem, on the other hand, to be largely cheerleaders for what the government is doing. And that's not their role. If we do not have a free and fair and challenging media, then our democracy will become corrupted very quickly. Lord Sumption, the former Supreme Court Justice of England, stated last week that it's very easy for a country to become like China. to become a state of super control of its people, which denies freedom of action, freedom of movement, freedom of expression to its people. It's very easy for a modern democratic, technocratic state to become like that, but it's extremely difficult for it to come back. And once these measures have been implemented over a period of time and been accepted, sadly, by the people, then it can be very, very difficult to get rid of them. And I think that's what we have to worry about. So I'm afraid our main pillars of society have not worked very well, and it is going to come down to the people, and it's going to come down to small parties like ours to continue to carry this fight forward. And I ask for your support. We are one of the very few, perhaps the only, organised political party of any credibility which is continually challenging the government on this matter. We were the very first party to call for an end to the lockdown. I think the first video I made on it was 3 weeks into the lockdown, because we were told that this would be introduced for a 3-week period to flatten the curve, but of course that hasn't happened. So bear these matters in mind, and I think it's time to abandon fear. Fear never brings one anywhere. And this has been Michael Leahy of the Irish Freedom Party, asking you to support our moves to bring this irrationality to an end.